Eric sat at the dining table, his fingers absently drumming against the polished mahogany surface. The house was quiet, too quiet. Jessica had taken the baby out for a routine checkup, and for the first time in weeks, Eric had a moment alone. But instead of enjoying the silence, he found himself drowning in his own thoughts. It had started as a whisper in the back of his mind, a nagging feeling, a timeline that didn't add up. Jessica's pregnancy had been a joyous surprise, a gift they had both celebrated with nervous excitement. But looking back now, Eric remembered the strange moment when she had announced it. The calculated way she had waited until he returned from a month-long business trip. How she had timed it perfectly so there could be no doubt in his mind that the child was his. And yet, Eric reached for the hospital bills he had found earlier that day, a crumpled receipt from a private OB/GYN clinic dated during the exact month he had been out of town. His pulse quickened as he studied the paper. Jessica had told him she didn't see a doctor until her second trimester. But this bill suggested otherwise. He inhaled sharply. Could he be overthinking? Was this just paranoia creeping in, twisting innocent details into something sinister? No. Eric was a man who lived by facts, by evidence, by logic, and when something didn't make sense, he pursued the truth until it lay bare before him. This was no different. With renewed focus, he pulled out his phone and scrolled through their shared family calendar. Jessica had always been meticulous about documenting appointments, her way of proving she had everything under control. But something was missing. The week the bill was dated, Jessica had marked a spa day and an outing with friends, no mention of a doctor's visit, no record of anything medical. Eric clenched his jaw. He was done second-guessing. It was time for certainty. By the time Jessica returned home, he had already made the call. The hospital had agreed to a paternity test, no questions asked. He scheduled an appointment for the next morning. As Jessica walked in, carrying their newborn in a bundle of soft blue blankets, she smiled at Eric as if nothing had changed, as if their world wasn't about to shatter. "Hey, love," she said, leaning down to kiss his cheek. "What's wrong? You look tense." Eric forced a smile. "Nothing," he replied smoothly. "Just thinking about how lucky I am." And in a way he was, because soon he would have the truth. And once he did, Jessica's carefully constructed lie would come crashing down. Eric sat in his car outside the hospital, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The envelope containing the DNA results lay on the passenger seat, an unassuming slip of paper with the power to confirm or shatter everything he had built. He exhaled slowly, steeling himself. There was no going back now. With a steady hand, he tore open the envelope and unfolded the document inside. His sharp eyes scanned the page, zeroing in on the critical line. Paternity probability 0%. The air in the car felt suddenly thinner. His ears rang. So it was true. Jessica had lied to him. She had stood before him, held his hand, and celebrated the arrival of a child she had known was not his. Eric let out a hollow laugh, though there was no humor in it. His instincts had been right. Every suspicion validated by cold, scientific fact. The betrayal was absolute, and with it came a burning clarity. He would not confront her like any other man might. He would not rage or plead. No, Jessica would face the weight of her choices in a way she never expected. His plan had already begun forming in the back of his mind, and now, with confirmation in hand, it solidified into something ruthless. He checked his watch. Jessica would be at home tending to the baby, blissfully unaware of the hurricane about to descend upon her life. Eric started the engine and drove, his mind a machine of precision. By the time he arrived home, the expression on his face was unreadable, his demeanor perfectly controlled. Jessica was in the nursery, humming a soft lullaby as she rocked the baby. The sight would have been heartwarming once before he knew the truth. He leaned against the doorframe and watched her, silent. Jessica looked up, her blue eyes sparkling with warmth. "Hey, you're home early." Eric smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, I finished up some errands, quicker than expected." He stepped closer, studying her. "How was your day?" She sighed contentedly. "Exhausting but wonderful. He barely napped, but I think he's settling now." Eric nodded, gaze dropping to the infant. He was innocent in all of this. None of this was his fault. But Jessica? She had made a mockery of their marriage. "Jessica," he said smoothly, "I was thinking we should do something special. Something to celebrate this new chapter in our lives." Her expression brightened. "That sounds amazing. What do you have in mind?" "A party," Eric said, keeping his voice casual. "A proper welcome home celebration for the baby. Friends, family, everyone who loves us. You'd like that, wouldn't you?" Jessica's lips parted in surprise before curling into a delighted smile. "Oh, Eric, that's perfect. I love it." He smiled back. "Good. I'll handle everything." Jessica beamed, oblivious to the ice in his veins. Eric had always believed that justice, when served, should be unforgettable, and Jessica's reckoning was coming. Eric moved with precision in the days leading up to the event, orchestrating every detail with the quiet patience of a man who knew the weight of the storm he was about to unleash. Jessica remained blissfully unaware, caught up in the excitement of planning the grand welcome home party for their baby. She had always been meticulous about social appearances, ensuring every event they hosted reflected their picture-perfect marriage. It was almost poetic, Eric thought, how this same desire for perfection would be the very stage of her downfall. The guest list included close friends, family, and some of Jessica's work colleagues, people who knew them both, who had seen them as the golden couple. There was something deeply satisfying about knowing that every person present would bear witness to the unraveling of her carefully woven deception. While Jessica fretted over floral arrangements and caterers, Eric was making his own preparations. He had the DNA test results duplicated and neatly folded into identical white envelopes. Each one was carefully sealed, ready to be placed at every guest seat like an invitation to the truth. And then there was Matt. Eric had debated for days whether to include the man in his plan, the other man, the biological father. It would have been easy to let Matt slink away into obscurity, but that wasn't justice. That wasn't the point. No, Matt needed to be there, needed to feel the weight of his actions alongside Jessica. So Eric sent the invitation personally, a simple, formal note written in his neat, deliberate handwriting. You've been a part of something for a long time, whether you knew it or not. I think it's time you take responsibility. Join us to celebrate the new addition to the family. It wouldn't be right without you there. Eric? It was a message layered in venom and quiet menace. And sure enough, Matt accepted the invitation, maybe out of curiosity, maybe out of fear, maybe because, like most men who thrived on reckless pleasure, he didn't see the consequences coming. Either way, the trap was set. The night of the party arrived, and their grand estate was alive with soft golden lights, laughter, and the clinking of crystal glasses. Jessica floated through the event like a queen in her castle, glowing with pride as she introduced their baby to every guest. Eric played his part to perfection. He smiled when he needed to, shook hands, made small talk, but inside he was counting down the moments. Then the moment arrived. He stepped forward, glass in hand, and gently tapped it with a fork. The room quieted instantly, all eyes turning toward him. "I'd like to thank you all for coming tonight," he began, his voice smooth, measured. "Jessica and I are so grateful to have such wonderful friends and family to celebrate this incredible new chapter in our lives." Jessica stood beside him, beaming. She reached for his hand, squeezing it in gratitude. Completely oblivious, Eric returned the squeeze. "A prelude to the execution? But before we continue," he continued, "I'd like to take a moment to honor the truth. After all, a family is built on honesty, isn't it?" There were nods, murmurs of agreement. Eric reached into the pocket of his suit jacket and withdrew the first envelope. He handed it to Jessica. Her smile faltered slightly as she took it, but she opened it with the same grace and confidence she carried in every social gathering. And she read it. Her face drained of color instantly. Her lips parted, but no words came. Eric took another envelope and handed it to her parents, then another to her best friend, and then, one by one, to every guest in the room. Confused whispers filled the space as people unfolded the documents. Then, gasps. Eyes darted toward Jessica. "Jessica," Eric said, his voice soft but cutting. "Would you like to explain?" She shook her head rapidly, her chest rising and falling in quick, shallow breaths. "Eric." "No more lies," he cut her off, his voice now firm. "Not to me. Not to them." Matt, who had been lingering near the bar, went rigid. His glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the marble floor. Someone in the crowd muttered, "Oh my God." Jessica stumbled back, her breath coming in short gasps. "Eric, please, we can talk about this. Privately." He tilted his head, considering. Then he simply said, "No." The reckoning had begun. The silence stretched through the grand hall like a taut wire, ready to snap. Dozens of stunned faces flicked between Jessica, Matt, and Eric, their minds racing to process the bombshell he had just dropped. Jessica's hands trembled as she clutched the damning piece of paper, her perfectly manicured nails now digging into the crisp edges of the DNA test. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came. There was nothing to say. Eric stepped back slightly, giving her space. Not out of kindness, but to let her feel the weight of every eye in the room. He wanted her to realize that there was no escaping this, no deflecting, no charming her way out of it. "Eric," she finally whispered, her voice unsteady. "Didn't have to do this. Not like this." He let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "You mean publicly? In front of everyone? Strange, isn't it? You had no problem lying in front of him, pretending, smiling." He shook his head. "You don't get to choose how the truth comes out, Jessica. That was my decision." Jessica's parents, once standing proudly near the front, now looked at her in horror. Her mother covered her mouth, eyes brimming with tears, while her father's face turned red with quiet fury. Matt, meanwhile, had paled considerably. He wasn't the type to handle confrontation well. Eric had predicted that much. Unlike Jessica, who thrived on control, Matt had the backbone of a coward. "I didn't know," Matt stammered, his voice cracking. "Jessica told me, she said it wasn't." Jessica turned to him sharply. "Shut up, Matt." Eric raised an eyebrow. "Oh, now you want to control the situation? How convenient." He let the words linger, savoring how Jessica squirmed under the pressure. The whispers among the guests grew louder, judgment rippling through the crowd like a wave. Friends who had once adored Jessica now looked at her with disgust. Women who had envied her perfect life now saw her for what she truly was. The men who had admired her grace saw only a fraud. "You know what's funny?" Eric continued, his tone calm but sharp as glass. "I could have confronted you in private. I could have argued, begged, maybe even tried to understand." He paused, letting his next words settle like poison. "But you never deserved that kindness." Jessica's breath hitched. "Eric, please." "No." His voice was final. "We're done." He turned to the guests, raising his glass. "Thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoyed the party. Consider this a celebration of truth." And with that, he placed his untouched drink on the nearest table and walked away, leaving Jessica frozen in the wreckage of her own making. Eric stepped outside, inhaling the crisp night air as he loosened his tie. The distant hum of voices and gasps still echoed behind him, but he didn't look back. He didn't need to. The damage was done, and Jessica was left standing in the ruins of her deception. As he reached his car, he paused, not because of doubt, there was none, but to absorb the finality of this moment. For years, he had built a life with Jessica, believing in their marriage, in their future. And in one night, he had dismantled it with the same level of precision that she had used to deceive him. The weight in his chest was not grief, it was liberation. Behind him, the doors of the house burst open. Jessica's frantic heels clicked against the pavement as she rushed toward him. "Eric, wait!" Her voice was desperate now, cracked with fear. "Please. We can fix this. We can talk." He turned to face her, and for the first time that night, he saw her for who she really was. Not the confident, beautiful woman he had married, but a person drowning in the consequences of her own choices. "There's nothing left to fix, Jessica," he said evenly. "There's no we anymore." Tears streaked her flawless makeup, but Eric felt nothing. No sympathy, no regret. Just the cold satisfaction of knowing he had taken away the illusion she had so carefully crafted. Um, "Eric, I made a mistake," she sobbed. "But I love you. I swear, I do." He let out a quiet, bitter chuckle. "You don't love me. You love the life I gave you, the security, the reputation." His gaze hardened. "You love the lie." Jessica reached for him, but he stepped back. That was all she would get. A glimpse of what she had lost. A new voice cut through the night. "Jessica?" Matt stood awkwardly near the entrance, his usual arrogance stripped away. He looked uncertain, like a man who had suddenly realized the ground beneath him was crumbling. Eric smirked. "Looks like you still have someone left, Jessica." His eyes flicked to Matt. "At least for now." Without another word, he opened his car door, got in, and drove away, leaving Jessica alone in the darkness, exactly where she belonged.